Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Bowl Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel, where the Chargers lose a 35-6 game to the Jacksonville Jaguars. For starters on the podcast, let's give big round of applauses. J.K. Scott, job well done. Cameron Dicker, job incredibly well done. Josh Harris, let's go. Let's go. Dean Leonard, getting that ball down at the one. Great job. That is the four Chargers who played to some level good today. Everyone else sucked. And that is where we stand with this football team after that game and that performance. Sadly, the Harbaugh brand, right, is supposed to be this physical team that makes teams quit. We saw this against Pittsburgh last week, right? So I don't want to completely say that that's an identity that doesn't exist, right? But we saw that against Minnesota. But that physicality just wasn't there today. And Harbaugh said it post-game. They got out-physicaled. Khalil Mack, said, hey, I think Harbaugh's right that, we got out-physicaled. And it just felt from a defensive perspective, from an offensive perspective, the Jaguars wanted it more. And I hate boiling down football games to that. And we'll talk about the scheme things and the stuff I think the Chargers could have done differently today. But sometimes football games just come down to that. And I felt like that was a very disappointing effort for the Chargers, considering that the Jags are, about as injured and going through it as the Chargers are. They don't have their right tackle today. Their left tackle stinks. They, don't have Brian Thomas. They're down bodies in the secondary, including Travis Hunter. So, to me, as much as I want to, as people will rely on the injury excuse, and that is the source for a lot of the Chargers' problems, especially when it comes to the offensive line, I don't really like it as the excuse for this game, right? Because the Jaguars are exactly as hurt as and beaten down as the Chargers are. And another storyline to talk about in this game, and we'll get into defense and offense specifically in a second, Liam Cohen just ran circles around the Chargers coaching staff outside of the players not wanting it. He has now scored 75 points in his last 8 quarters against Jesse Minter, including the Tampa Bay Bucks game last year where that Bucks offense put up 40. He puts up 35 today with a pretty injured Jags offense, all things considered, that really had not been getting to get things to click. That he ran circles around Harbaugh, he ran circles around Minter, and certainly ran circles around Greg Roman as well. So I don't have much to say outside of the Jags just wanted this game more today. They prepared more for it with less hubris. And that's how I think you get to this kind of result. Let's talk about offense first. A bad Justin Herbert game. It's not his fault, right, in terms of why this team is where it is. But look, and Herbert said it post game that he didn't play well enough relative to the level that this team needs, right? He said he hasn't been good enough for this team. In general, I think he meant that as kind of a broad statement of just, I need to play better. But this team has no, margin for error. This team basically needs Herbert to kind of go God mode every game, or else it is not going to be competitive, right? That's just the floor that they have. In their 4 losses this season, the Chargers are minus 63. That goes to the Giants game, minus 3. The Commanders game, they lost by 17. The Colts game, they lost by 14. And this game, they lose by 29, right? So this Chargers team, because of all the injuries, has a very low floor. And if I have a Herbert critique of this game, yes, I agree that it is not his fault. I agree that the offensive line is a problem. But Herbert had to play better than he did today, and he threw the interception, which he took 2 sacks that I think kind of, were a little bit more on him for not stepping up in the pocket. And, I think he needed to play better. But again, not laying this loss at the feet of him. Who I do think deserves a little bit more blame for the loss today is Greg Roman. I was very unimpressed with what the plan was coming in today, especially coming off of last week. And I, said on my pod last week, I was pretty impressed by what Roman had put together against the Steelers with TJ Watt and all those pass rushers. I felt like, even for some of the rougher offensive line performances in that game, including Austin Deculus, including Mekhi Becton, I felt like there was a decent amount of chip help to both tackles. I felt like there was a decent amount of quick game going on. I felt like, there were some productive plays. They got the running game going, right? I think this game is really proof that the Chargers are very game script dependent in their current state, meaning once they fall behind by one possession, two possessions, game's over. Once they went down 14-6, I'm like, ooh, they need a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. I don't know if that's happening in this one. That's going to be really tough to get back into. And as soon as they went down 21-6, it's just like, okay, you can start firing up the buses to get to the airport because this one's over. And so, Kimani gets injured in this game. They try to get a little bit of run game going with Amar Johnson and Travion Williams, who combined put up 5 carries for 7 yards. Kimani got injured, then came back, but by the time he came back, they couldn't run the ball because they were basically down 2 scores. So, when Roman can't get the run game going, then it's going to fall on his pass concepts, right? And there was just nothing in this game that was working in that regard. I think my biggest critique of Roman this game relative to last game was there was a certain amount of hubris in this game plan. I've used that word before, but again, against the Steelers, they have, while the offensive line wasn't good, I felt like they had more quick game design stuff to get the Chargers kind of going, a little bit more of the easy buttons, as Steven says. And in this game, Roman basically isolates Trevor Penning one-on-one the whole game. That's just not me making up like a statement too. Chris Rim of ESPN tweeted that via Next Gen Stats. Trevor Penning had a 71% island rate this game going into Sunday Night Football last night. That was the highest island rate of any tackle in the league this week that played more than 10 snaps. Right? So it's just like you went into this game with Trevor Penning, who, we'll talk about his performance specifically, but Penning had not played tackle in 2 years, right? Or left tackle, I should say specifically. He played right tackle last year, guard this year. He had not played left tackle and been the blindside protector since 2023. He's been here for a week and a half in this offensive line system. And I don't know, I as much as I want to look, I don't like Trevor Penning as a player. I think he's bad. I think he stinks. It's hard to lay this entirely at his feet when he has been, here for a week and a half and is basically being asked to be Joe Alt and being asked to be on an island the whole game, right? Because that's not what he should have been asked to do. And so that's like a hard thing for me to excuse Greg Roman on. And again, like the warning on fucking smoking labels when it comes to, the disclaimer, no Alt, no Slater, no this, no that. I completely sympathize with Greg Roman on those things. But when you throw Trevor Penning out in this game, who's been here for a week and a half, and your game plan doesn't support him in any way, it's really hard for me to be that sympathetic, right? In addition to they have 10 passing attempts, go 38 yards, right, in their first 10 passes or something like that. They're trying dead plays downfield that result in Kimani getting the ball, and he gets decked 7 yards in the backfield on a play to Jags snuffed out. And so, yeah, I don't know, man. It really is a complete 180 on the game plan that I felt Greg Roman called last week against the Steelers. Um, and again, the conditions are far from optimal. But I think when you come into this game and not, prepared for the Steelers pass rush, and they had Matlock and Fisk, and they had all these, the goon package, as they call it, which we need to have a better name for that at some point. They had them basically out there to kind of provide as much protection as possible. Have, Kimani and Gadsden and these guys like chip in addition to those guys. Now, some of how much they played last game was a little bit skewed, obviously, by the Aronde injury where he doesn't play the second half. But there was like 7 Tucker Fisk snaps. And Jim Harbaugh in his press conference this week called Tucker Fisk tight end 2 to Aronde Gadsden, which I just thought was like, all right, so he's going to be like your primary blocker that you're going to want to have out there, right? On some of these plays in the 3 tight end package, right? They didn't do any of that today. He was on the field for 7 snaps relative to 27 last game. I think Matlock might have been out there for 3 snaps. Like, they didn't lean on that at all, which again, if you're trying to like protect Justin Herbert as much as possible, if you're trying to help your offensive line out as much as possible, I just don't get why they abandoned that, other than they thought they had it easy against this Jags pass rush. And Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker and those guys said, all right, this is how you want to play us. This is how you're going to play us. And they made them pay for it. And so, yeah, like, I think it's a fair accusation to say that the protection plan today was the Chargers thinking they could pull a fast one over the Jags after, being well prepared for the Steelers last week. And I felt like from a player performance standpoint, the blocking was terrible, but primarily from a coaching standpoint, I just felt like they kind of failed the players, whether that was Roman, Mike Devlin, everybody involved. There's a play where Aronde Gadsden is left one-on-one with Trayvon Walker. Why is that happening? And then Herbert gets hit on 3rd down and they have to punt. So it's just like there's so many like little plays you can point to in this game where I felt like a lack of attention to detail, a lack of preparation for the offense really set them back. And to me, that starts with Greg. To call for firings and this stuff, again, I think at the end of the day, as much as a mistake as I think it will be, Greg Roman's going to get another year because of the injuries. But one of the reasons that I was always very, very hesitant about hiring Greg Roman, to the point where I wanted Ben Johnson as head coach over Jim Harbaugh, was because I just feel like in these positions where you need an offensive coordinator who's going to kind of maximize and supplement your offense as much as possible, Greg Roman doesn't get it done in this league at the end of the day. And so, do I believe he can 2 weeks, you have a bye and you can, come back against the Raiders? Sure. Like, I believe that he's capable of doing that. But in the games where you're going to need the offense kind of maximized, like going against Philadelphia's defense, like going against Kansas City's defense, which can still play fairly well, as we saw against Denver yesterday, definitely not a bad defensive performance from them. It's just going to be very hard for me to buy this offense doing much in those terms when it feels like they basically need the defense to pitch a perfect game to have a chance. The second they go down a touchdown, the second they go down by more than one possession, the game is kind of over. And it's like, that's why the Chargers are currently a playoff team right now. But it's very hard for me to buy them as a legit playoff team, where, hey, the playoffs are about getting into a shootout with the Bills. The playoffs are about getting into a shootout, in years past with the Chiefs, or getting into some of these back and forth kind of games. And the Chargers simply don't have the ability to go back and forth with anyone right now. The second they go down by a possession, the second they lose another player on offense, the second they, call another run play that doesn't work. The second Herbert gets, raw dogged in the backfield again, it's time to punt the ball back to the other team, or worse, throw a pick or commit a fumble, whatever. So I don't know. I think my macro takeaway is, yes, I think this is probably a rougher offensive performance than we will see the rest of the season. But the Chargers the whole year have not put up 30 more than one time. They did it once against the Vikings. And for that reason, it's really hard to buy this team in a shootout kind of back and forth environment when the defense isn't at its best. And by isn't at its best, I mean when the defense isn't allowing basically fewer than 20 or 10 points. Other than that, hard to buy that the Chargers can win and stick in many of these games. Justin Herbert stunk today. Greg Roman stunk today. The whole team stunk. But the offensive line, and particularly Greg Roman and Mike Devlin's approach to the offensive line in this game, are really the things that I think plague my thinking in terms of, can this team put anything together even if they do get a wild card spot and have to go against Denver or have to go against any of these teams. I don't know. I don't see the vision right now in terms of them being able to win one playoff game. But fuck, let's make the playoffs first. Defensively, it's more of the same. I felt like, again, they didn't really want it today. And for all the talk about this is a big revenge game, I don't want to throw Khalil Mack under the bus by any means. He's one of the leaders of this team. But he leaned into, hey, we have unfinished business in Jacksonville. We have it as motivation in our back pocket, right? I'm pretty sure he had 2 pressures in the first half, and then kind of nothing else the rest of the game. The defensive line, for the first time in a while, seemed very, very juiceless, really for the first time since that Colts game. I was lucky to not podcast after that one because I was busy that week. However, I'm not quite as lucky this time around. But the defensive line got pushed around by a Jags offensive line that has been much maligned the entire year. Shout out to, again, Liam Cohen for galvanizing his guys. But it felt like just a failure in the trenches on both sides of the ball. And that applies to the defensive line as well. Not great when you don't hear really a single defensive lineman make a play the whole game outside of 2 quick Khalil Mack pressures maybe that he got in the first half. But that was kind of it. And it looks that way to me on the stat sheet as well. Some dumb penalties that got committed, although the mold and PIs, not that would have changed the outcome of the game. But I thought the first one was certainly a soft call. But again, the Chargers had 76 tackles today. Technically, by the ESPN count, it doesn't really feel like that was the physicality level of the defense today, if you will, right? Where it's one of those things where you look at the box score, particularly, hey, they only allowed Trevor Lawrence to have 150 yards. The ground game was, definitely much worse for the Chargers defensively, but they only allowed 4 yards per carry. However, they allowed 192 yards, and the Jags got a bunch of extra chunk yards kind of at will. Dan Henley played pretty bad today. There's a rep of him and Cam Hart just kind of getting dog walked by the Jaguars offensive line. And again, it's just more of where was Derwin James today? Didn't really feel like he, was making many impact plays at all. Of course, we can say this after any loss where the defense allowed 35 points, that really there were no standout performers today. The Chargers got killed in the slot in the middle of the field. And as much as I would say that this is a new phenomenon, I also think there were things on tape the last couple of weeks which left that middle of the field open, particularly against Tennessee. I remember Cam Ward having a couple throws that he just flat out missed that would have been conversions. Chargers also, technically, if you look at the box score, I think Oh, no, actually, yeah, that's true. So the Jags on third and fourth down today went 8 for 15. They were 5 for 10 on third down, even though it was 50%, which is still, bad for defensive third downs. It felt worse than that. It felt like every time there was a 3rd and 6 or a 3rd and 12, outside of that very opening of the game where the Chargers got that turnover on downs, it felt like it was kind of over for the Chargers once they got to that down on distance, because Jacoby Myers would be wide open. And again, Minter goes super heavy with the zone. They're playing soft coverage off. I feel like that's another example of we talked about kind of the hubris of just thinking you could chuck Penning out there on an island. I think that that's another example of like, hey, we're not going against like an elite receiving core. We're not going against an elite number one option where like we have to take DK Metcalf out of the picture like Minter did last week. And so I felt like he kind of underestimated what the Jags were able to do offensively. And, for him to, again, he kind of talked his shit, not talked his shit, but it was like, hey, I'm excited for this matchup with Liam Cohen after we got, smacked by the Bucs last year. And Liam Cohen had him in the vice grip today. I don't by any means want to excuse player performance, but I also think Jesse Minter didn't really do anything to maximize his group as well. And I think this season has produced some real games where, like, I think you can side eye Jesse Minter as a head coaching candidate. I think he's more than deserving as an intellectual mind and all the stuff that he's done. Certainly last year got the best out of some very bare bones skeleton Chargers defense where they kind of were just picking guys off of the street and maximizing their talent. But the Chargers really don't have a statement defensive win this year. Like, if you go back through it, right? They play 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, who had one of the worst games of his life. Yes, Jesse Minter contributed to that. But I thought any team that has their quarterback making as many self-inflicted errors as Rodgers did is just not going to be competitive. Against the Titans, I thought Cam Ward also had one of his worst games. Yes, you could say Jesse Minter caused that, but there were open throws in the middle of the field in that one that Cam Ward wasn't able to take advantage of. They play Carson Wentz with a torn labrum and his meat falling off of the shoulder bone. Am I supposed to be massively impressed by that effort? Yes, I thought it was better for the defense on short rest from the Colts game, but still, like, the Vikings obviously were not in an optimal position offensively to do very much. And you can keep going on through the season, so on and so forth. Obviously, there's the Colts game, the Commanders game, the Dolphins game where they kind of allowed Tua to cook and needed a Herbert miracle game-winning drive and a Nyheim Hines kick return to be in a position to win that game. But, I don't know. I think this is a Chargers defense that, given the right circumstances and playing against the right quarterbacks and, playing against playing zone against the offenses where it will work the most, can probably have good defensive performances. They'll probably have a decent defensive performance against the Raiders. But when it comes to these teams that have their starting quarterback, have a good play caller, and have guys that frankly just give a shit on offense, I think Minter has left a lot to be desired this season. I don't think there's any macro conversations about firing him or doing any of this kind of stuff or making these coaching changes. But the no-show games for this defense, just like we talked about no-show games kind of for the offense, are notable. And I don't know what you do with so many of the leaders on this team also struggling in this game, including Deon, including Derwin, including Khalil, right? Those are the guys who are supposed to set the tempo for your defense, and they just didn't have the energy despite all the big man talk about the Jacksonville game. So I think I'll just leave it off with this, where this team wants to be taken seriously by the media, The fan base wants Herbert in MVP talks. The this team just isn't that. Like, and I don't even mean that as an affront to Herbert for how he's played in previous games. But this team does not deserve to be taken seriously as a contender when they've lost by 63 points in their 4 losses. And that's just, like, to me, the raw, honest truth. And we're going to learn a lot more about where the rubber meets the road here when they have to play the Eagles in primetime. They have to play the Chiefs at Arrowhead, coming out of the bye after they play the Raiders, right? That'll give us a good feel of, like, where this team is at. And I'm not saying they can't win those games, but when you are so up and down this season from your wins to your losses, and you don't play the same way every week, that's going to cost you against those veteran, elite NFL programs and teams. And I feel like we've seen the Chargers can kind of take care of business against the small fish in the NFL and take care of business against, the tanking teams, except the Giants, to some extent the Commanders this year. But last year we saw the, team take care of business against the teams that they should take care of business of as well. At the same time, over the last 2 years, minus the Broncos and Chiefs game, which, I give them credit for, when they play a real offense that can kind of match wits with them and also, put some defensive pressure on Herbert and give Roman some things to think about, they don't play well. And again, I think for all the complaining that we want to do that the media doesn't talk about this team enough, why are they not higher in the power rankings and, all these things, like the Chargers haven't given, anyone reason to think about them as a serious playoff contender. And of course, the injuries have hampered them this offseason. It's going to be hard to get many of the analysts who watch the offensive line and know how good Joe Alt is and know how good Rashawn Slater is to buy in on this team that they could have a chance in a wild card game at Denver. They could have a chance in a wild card game against Baltimore or Pittsburgh or one of those teams, even though they just beat Pittsburgh. So that's just kind of where I'm at with it. And it is disappointing, to say the least, that this was the effort today. You had a chance to go 8-3 for the first time since 2018. And the Chargers play yet another game where they let us know that they're not for real. And so a lot of questions to be answered on offense, on defense, everything going forward. And, to credit Harbaugh, this was the first time he didn't come to the podium and throw acid in my face, where it felt like, it wasn't, oh man, our guys played hard. He was like, no, we sucked today. And, we didn't do anything good schematically. And we have to kind of take a look in the mirror. Not that those were his exact words, but certainly a different tone than he's had in previous post-loss press conferences. Will anything happen during the bye week? I don't know. I think this team is a team that is running out of moves a little bit to make, right? You tried the Trevor Penning switch up today. It failed miserably, in part because of Greg Roman, in part because Herbert didn't have a good game, in part because Penning didn't have a very good game at all. It does feel like a very rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And, after the Steelers game last week, there was someone who came back to my Titans loss video after Alt got hurt and was like, see, the sky isn't falling, dumbass. Things are fine. And I was just like, that's cool. However, the ceiling of this team right now is wild card loss. And I don't think that really changed that much after the Pittsburgh game, although the Greg Roman day gave me some inspiration that maybe there's something they could do against Denver or something in a playoff game. But the ceiling of this team right now is a 5-7 seed, and you lose in the first round, maybe in a more embarrassing way than you did to Houston last year. And I get the injuries, certainly not something that is easy to cope with. But it's very tough as a fan base, to believe that that's where we're at going into year 2, and that this year is just kind of a wash at this point. So obviously going to watch the Chargers going forward. We're not going anywhere. As tough as these post-loss pods are, and they suck to do. But we will go into the next week and hope for something better, hope for something after the bye, certainly. They'll get Hampton back, probably, and you can talk yourself into beating the Raiders, which I believe they can do. Not sure about the next 2 games after that. But we will keep it locked in here on Bolt Breakdowns. Next week, on Monday, I am planning to do a Q&A. I'm going to wait a couple days to put the Q&A out because I think people will be very angry for the next week. So maybe after our heads cool by Thursday, Friday, maybe Saturday or Sunday, I will put out the form for questions on YouTube and on Twitter, and I'm sure we'll get a bunch of macro questions talking about the draft and stuff for next year, in addition to how they finished the year out this year. So that'll be the yearly Q&A on this podcast. Usually when the bye week is earlier, and I've done the Q&A for 3 weeks now, talking about the bye week, there's usually, who can they trade for to maximize the team? Not happening this year because we already traded for Trevor Penning and things are looking great. Okay, bye, bolt up, take care of yourself, and see you guys next week.